All right, everyone, good morning. We will get started here, and hopefully we'll have anybody who hasn't yet joined us will join us along the way. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Bob Kefgen. I'm the lobbyist at MASSP. Just wanted to give you guys hopefully a brief, not too lengthy legislative update as you're coming back to school and getting ready for things, so you guys know what happened and wrap up some of the things you can look forward to, new laws starting this year, and what we can expect going into the fall. As you can see here, I'm going to touch briefly on our policy priorities for this current two-year legislative session, followed up with some of the biggest things that you guys are going to need to know going into next year. Big changes in the law is stuff that you're going to want to make sure you have a handle on. And then some smaller things that you'll want to do to prep for the 17-18 school year. Finally, I'll touch on some pending issues. These are things that haven't happened yet, but may happen this fall. They're not things you need to worry about or react to right now, but just wanted to make sure you'd heard about them so that you weren't caught off guard later in the year as these things sort of pop as you're back to school and worrying about what you're going to be dealing with in the next year. So briefly, and I've presented on this a couple of times now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but at MASSP, we set priorities in a two-year cycle to match up with the legislative calendar. So the school calendar obviously is July to June. The legislative calendar is a calendar year, so January to December, and they go in a two-year cycle. So we've set, with your help, our policy priorities for the 17-18 school year. We did that collaboratively. It started as a process with the board of directors at MASSP, whom you guys elect. And then the final priorities, the top 5 there, were selected in conjunction with you guys as part of a survey we put out. Some surprises this year, things that hadn't been necessarily on our policy priority radar before that jumped up. Substitute teacher shortage being one of those, student mental health being another. The other 3 on there, school funding, educator eval, and school calendar, have been perennial issues that we've been working on. But we, as you'll see later in this presentation, we've been making pretty good progress on some of our major priorities this year so far, and look forward to doing more of that in the upcoming year. I think Chelsea is chatting out a link here to a trifold that we put together, sort of outlining our priorities. This is something I use as a handout when I meet with legislators so that they have an idea of what we're about and what we're working on for the upcoming year. Feel free to use it as you guys see fit. It's public information. If you have any questions about these priorities or the process, feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email. I'm happy to walk you guys through it, but know that they are member set and member driven. So I promised the big issues first, the big stuff, the stuff that you guys need to worry about immediately coming up here. I always get this question, so I figure I'll toss it in the big issues, hit it right up front. Where's my 3%? I want my 3% back. The state people got their 3% back a long time ago. Where's mine? Very briefly, the Supreme Court is set to hear arguments in the case. This case for the 3% for school employees is very different than the case for state employees. The two really don't have any bearing on each other. Without getting too deeply into the constitutional ramifications here, the difference is that for state employees, there's something called the civil service, and that doesn't apply to school employees. Civil service is set out in the Constitution as dictating terms and conditions of work for state employees. So that same argument that held up in the state employees case doesn't apply to school employees. Again, happy to get into more details if you guys have questions, but I think that the relevant piece here is that the Supreme Court has agreed to hear arguments in this 3% case. It has moved through every lower court in the state already, and every lower court, including the Court of Appeals, has already ruled that the state has to return the 3% to school employees. Note that this is the 3% paid over the course of one school year, the 2010-2011 school year. It is just that 1 year. There was a subsequent change in the law that has been ruled constitutional, so we're only talking about that 1 that one-off year. Now, it's not a tiny amount of money. It's about $550 million at this point. And the lower courts have ruled that the state has to refund that money with interest to school employees. But the Supreme Court agreed to hear arguments in the case. And so I have my what is the Supreme Court signaling question here. If the Supreme Court wanted that money or felt that that money should go back to school employees, all they had to do was nothing. If they would have refused to hear the case, the lower court ruling would have stood and the money would have flowed back to school employees. You don't know what the Supreme Court is going to do. You certainly can't predict, but I'll tell you that the signal here to me looks pretty clear, and that's that the Supreme Court intends to change the lower court ruling in some form or fashion. Does that mean you'll never see your 3% again? No, it doesn't mean that, but I wouldn't bank on it, and I certainly wouldn't plan to spend the money anytime soon. Even if the Supreme Court, for some reason, decides that they're going to uphold the lower court rulings, the logistics of the refunds would mean that it's going to be quite some time before any school employees see this money back. So even though we would expect something from the Supreme Court within the next calendar year-ish, it could take even longer for a refund. So that's the latest and greatest on 3%. I wish I had better news for you, but I don't. Title II funding, big issue going on right now. The president's budget proposed eliminating Title IIA entirely. For Michigan, that would be a loss of $84.5 million. That's a big hit, particularly for districts that rely on that money for professional development. And as you can see from the infographic there, most of Title II goes toward professional development nationally. That's certainly the case in Michigan. It would be a big hit for many districts' ability to provide professional development. Based on the comments we've heard from, as you can see there, the Senate Subcommittee Chair and others, including some in our Michigan delegation, the idea of completely eliminating Title II doesn't seem like it's going to fly, but then again, the House Subcommittee already reported out a budget recommendation that does include the elimination of Title II. So to that end, MASSP is working, we're one of many organizations working on this, but we're working to put together a petition, and we're collecting signatures on that petition. And at the end of the summer, the deadline for signatures is August 31st. Come September, we're going to be sharing this information with our Michigan delegation. Right now, we're at about 750 signatories on this petition. We would really like to top 1,000 before the end, to be able to say that 1,000 educators in Michigan all agree that retaining Title IIA and saving those dollars is a big deal for the state of Michigan. So please, if you haven't already, consider signing on to our Title IIA petition. Chelsea just chatted out a link to this, and I will go back at the end and we'll have a little bit on Engage, and you'll have another link there at the end. But if you haven't already, please sign our petition, and please feel free to distribute it to your professional networks, to your staff, to any other educators who are going to be affected by this were it to go through. Would really like to send a strong message to our federal delegation and let them know that protecting Title IIA needs to be a priority for them in this upcoming budget process. Last on our big issues list, MIPSers. This is the only slide I have on MIPSers, and the reason I keep it brief is because at least in the very short term, there are only a couple of small changes. You'll see there that the big changes that they made to MIPSers really don't take effect for new hires until February of next year. There will be more information coming from MASSP as we get closer to that date so that you know what to expect. But at least for this fall, all your new teachers starting this fall are going to be coming in under the old Pension Plus system. There won't be any changes to it. And so the rules you already know pretty much apply. The two big changes that you need to know about coming up this fall, September 29th at 5 p.m. is the deadline for MIP and basic members to buy service credit. That's buying years, purchasing years. Any of your Pension Plus folks, your hybrid folks, that's new employees hired since 2010, they've never had the option to buy years. So this change really only applies to folks who are in the MIP or basic system who were hired before 2010 and who have the option to buy service credit. You've still always had that option. If you're going to do it, now is the time. You've got to either pay for those years by September 29th or have an agreement in place with ORS to pay off the years over a period of time. If that agreement is not in place by that deadline, then you will be out of luck when it comes to buying years. Just be aware of that. And then for any of you who have employees that instead of going into the Pension Plus system, elected to do the 401k style system that the state offers, note that beginning October 1st, they're going to be getting a new, richer defined contribution benefit. Right now, it's a pretty lean benefit that they get. It's a 50% match up to 3%. So they have to put in 6% to get a total of 9%. It's changing, and we'll have another article out very close to that deadline so that you know what you're getting into. But it's essentially pay 3%, the same 3%, and they'll get a total of 10%. So it's going to cost them about half as much of their salary, and they're going to get more than twice the benefit. So just be aware of that starting, but this is only for employees who are already in the defined contribution or 401k style system for the state. That's really all you need to know about MIPSers at this point. I know I get a lot of questions on this, so I just wanted to be right up front with you guys and look for more articles coming as the big deadline in February gets closer, and as the October 1 deadline gets closer, we'll have more information for you. So let's look at things you're going to have to adjust to in the upcoming school year. Gird your loins, because there are some big changes coming. Yes, there is an illustrated guide there for girding up your loins. That's very important. Everybody needs to know how to gird one's loins, especially in education. So let's start out with one of the biggest issues that's coming up this year, seclusion and restraint. Last calendar year, at the end of 2016 during lame duck, they passed this law, and the law took effect on August 1 of this year. So it's already in effect. This law applies to all students. One of the biggest misconceptions I see with this is that, oh, well, this is just for special ed kids, I don't need to worry about it. No, it applies to all students, every single public school student. However, there are exceptions carved into this law around the uses of emergency seclusion and emergency restraint for many of the common uses of emergency seclusion or emergency restraint that you guys would engage in, particularly breaking up fights or stopping a physical assault is exempted from this law. So you're breaking up a fight, that's fine. The restraint laws do not apply to you in this case. In-school suspension, nope, it's not seclusion. So in-school suspension continues as is. If you're isolating a student during an investigation, let's say it's a bullying incident and you put the suspected bully in your office while you're questioning other kids, or put somebody in a conference room, nope, it's not seclusion in those circumstances. The definitions are pretty clear that seclusion only applies if you're locking the door. So you're pretty good in most cases. However, you do want to know about what this law is and where the lines are on this. To that end, MDE has finalized, though they have not yet released for their final guidance. That guidance gives us more information that we very much need and that you guys very much need, which includes the scope of awareness training, some clarifications on key issues. For example, what we've been told is that they're going to clearly define it so that if a student, let's say you've got a student having an emotional outburst and you clear the classroom, but the teacher stays in there, so it's just the student and the teacher in the classroom by themselves, is that seclusion? Our understanding is that the clarification is going to say no, it's only seclusion if the student is completely alone by themselves in a room. That's a key clarification that we need. Unfortunately, that final guidance hasn't yet been released as of this date. However, we expect it very soon. And by very soon, I mean I wouldn't be surprised if I get an email later today with it. So this is coming. MDE is also going to be providing sample forms for things like debrief meetings with parents and reporting to the state, those sorts of things. They're also going to be very specific in specifying what the reporting requirements are around this new law. Once that guidance comes out, We'll be putting that out to all of our membership, so watch your web lines, watch your email. We'll get that out to you. I'm sure we'll be sharing it in other ways as well. We also have, and I know Chelsea has shared it, we have a one-page guide on this new seclusion and restraint laws that break down all the major points that she just sent a link out to. Definitely check that out. We really tried to turn it into a reference document that principals could use. We geared it at the building level, tried to keep it in terms of the very basic do's, don'ts, and what you need to worry about. So rather than going into extreme detail here in this presentation, this is a pretty robust law, lots to know about it. So check out our seclusion and restraint resource center that we've put together. MASSP is also working on an awareness training video that we will need to get MDE approval for. It's currently under review by MDE. We're waiting on approval, but the idea would be a brief video, probably about a half an hour, that you can show to your staff during a staff meeting that will fulfill the state requirement to provide awareness training to your staff. For those of you who are Troon Law retainer clients, I know they've already put together some modules that you can use and send it out to their retainer clients. MASSP is working on this, and we're going to be making this freely available to folks so that you can use it, and it will be MDE approved so that it will do the same thing for you that the Troon videos will do for Troon retainer clients. It will come with a full suite of resources, including not just the video, but the presentation itself, as well as a handout that you can give to your staff that gives them the information that they need, and will include all the appropriate cues and prompts that the state's going to want to see. So we're working on that. We've just got to wait on MDE right now. As I was talking about in the previous slide, we're waiting on them for some guidance. We're waiting on them for this. There is a lot that happened with this law over the summer, and it's just a question of getting this stuff across the finish line ASAP. We very much know that you guys need this stuff so that you can be ready for the upcoming school year. So before next school year, this is for the new seclusion restraint law. These are my 4 boxes that you absolutely want to check. Make sure you've done a review of your IEP and BIPS to ensure compliance. And when I say compliance, your IEPs and BIPS should not specify the use of seclusion or restraint as something that's prescribed in the IEP or the BIP. Just make sure those things aren't in there, and you should be pretty good. Identify your key personnel. This is something you're going to need to be doing at a district level as well as a building level. But what you're going to want to know is the law requires that key personnel, specifically trained personnel, be generally available to respond to an emergency. You need to have a plan for identifying who those folks are. Make sure you have enough of them so that you generally have somebody in the building who's available to respond to an emergency. And then point 3, make sure they get the comprehensive training for key personnel that they are required to have. For most folks, this is going to be your crisis team. These folks will largely be trained to a greater or lesser extent. You're going to want to go through or have them go through the key personnel training requirements and make sure that they can check the box on that stuff. I know a lot of districts use Crisis Prevention Institute. They've done a crosswalk of their training to the new Michigan requirements. That's a resource on our resource center that you can take a look at. So many of you will have checked this box already, but just be aware that it's coming up. And last but not least, certainly not least, all of your staff who have regular contact with students. That's not just teachers, that's your subs, that's your parapros, it could be your cafeteria workers, it might be your daytime custodians if they're in the building and have regular contact with students, your bus drivers. Some of these are going to be outside the scope of the principal's role. It's going to be more central office, but everyone who has regular contact with students is going to need to have awareness training. Like I said, however, when we're talking awareness training, we're talking probably about a half an hour video with a handout. There will be some local pieces you'll need to provide, specifically your local emergency response plan. You'll need to discuss that, or at least provide information on it and review it. But for the most part, this will be a pretty plug and play and simple requirement to comply with. But know that it's going to have to apply to everyone. Just a couple of quick questions I'm seeing, and I'm going to try to get to most questions during the presentation, but I might have to hit a couple at the end. Where do you access the comprehensive training? Comprehensive training isn't something that is going to be provided, in a video form by an MASSP or a TRUN. That's a pretty lengthy list of training requirements. Like I said, I know a lot of districts use Crisis Prevention Institute for their crisis team. There are a laundry list of requirements for that. You're going to want to go over, and if you check out the handout that Chelsea sent out a link to, I believe it includes the list of all of the things that key personnel need to be trained in. So that's the best advice I can give you there. I think as you look at the list, what you're going to see is that the type of training required for key personnel is stuff that probably somebody in your building or a couple of somebody's already have big parts of. I don't think it's a huge deal. I shouldn't say that. It is going to be a big deal, but I don't think it's so far out of left field that it's not going to be something you have to start on. So I'm going to move on to zero tolerance. This is the other big thing that you're going to need to prep for. Again, and just like the seclusion restraint law, this took effect August 1st. And the best way I can summarize what they did with zero tolerance is to effectively eliminate zero tolerance in Michigan. The biggest change they made was that they said that for all suspensions and expulsions except firearms, that's not just zero tolerance offenses, that's every single suspension or expulsion except firearms, that you have to consider these 7 factors that are listed on the right-hand side of this slide. You have to show that you've considered them and whether or not any of those factors are mitigating when it comes to the student's offense. So for example, you've got a student who, maybe a young student, wouldn't otherwise know that they shouldn't have done X. You can use now student's age as a reason to mitigate what would otherwise be a zero tolerance offense. The student doesn't have any disciplinary history, so the student brings a knife to school. Again, that's not a firearm, so it applies in this case. Student brings a knife to school, and the student doesn't have any disciplinary history. You decide not to expel, even though it would otherwise be a zero tolerance offense. You can cite the student's disciplinary history as a reason for mitigation. But you have to show that you have considered each of those 7 factors in every case of suspension or expulsion. Chelsea just sent out a link to our Seclusion Restraint Zero Tolerance Resource Center. We have another one-pager on zero tolerance there that walks through all of this, gives you the 7 factors. We also have sample forms, a sample discipline form that you can use that will check the box for you guys on showing that you've considered the 7 factors so that you have fulfilled the requirement. Especially for suspensions over 10 days or expulsions, there is the law now also includes a rebuttable presumption that such a discipline is not justified. A rebuttable presumption is, a very simple example, is innocent until proven guilty. We presume that you are innocent until you're shown guilty. In this case, we presume that a suspension over 10 days or an expulsion is unjustified until you demonstrate that it is. The way you demonstrate that it's justified, very simply, you consider those 7 factors and you show that none of them apply to mitigate. That's all you have to do, but it makes it even more important that you can document that you've considered those 7 factors. So what do you need to do before the start of the school year that's coming up very quickly here? Number 1, you need to update your student handbook to reflect the new law. If you're looking for examples on this, MASSP has its model student handbook. You are welcome to get a hold of that and use ours. We've updated ours to reflect both seclusion restraint and zero tolerance. You're also going to want to update your forms and your processes. Again, we've got a sample form out there that you guys can have free access to that takes care of checking the box on considering all of those 7 factors. but update your forms and processes to make sure that they're in compliance with the new law. Last but not least, educate your staff. And when I say educate your staff, do they need to know the 7 factors? Do they need to memorize the handout? No. Biggest thing that you're probably going to want to do is you're going to want to make sure that staff know that those 7 factors are there, because considering those 7 factors may result in different discipline outcomes than what they're used to. And that's just one of those things you want to make sure that folks know that, hey, starting this year, these new laws took effect. This is how we're planning on handling them locally, so this could be a change for you in how you live your day-to-day. And make sure that they know what role, if any, they may play in restorative practices. Restorative practices, I know, has been a touch point for a lot of folks. Oh God, what do I do? What are these restorative practices? Note that for a lot of folks, you're probably already doing some form of restorative practices. I've watched Lisa Swem do presentations on this 3 times now, Lisa Swem from Troon, and she tells the story about how her grandfather got in trouble when he was in school back at the turn of the century, and got in trouble with a bunch of buddies for tipping over the school outhouse. The principal hauled the school outdoors, all the students outdoors, and made her grandfather and his buddies tip the outhouse back up and then apologized to the students. A very simple but very real example of restorative practices at the turn of the previous century. So things like that, you may already be doing some form of it. Just be aware that it's now one of the 7 factors you have to consider is whether or not that would be appropriate. So as I referenced earlier, and Chelsea already sent out a link to it, it's our Seclusion Restraint Zero Tolerance Resource Center. Lots of good stuff there. We've got quick reference guides, sample forms, some FAQs, got links to all the statutes that have changed, and a bunch of other resources as well. Good place to go if you have questions. For those of you who are still a little bit worried about restorative practices, MASSP has got a new partnership. We're doing a restorative practices training, 2 different trainings with a gentleman named Roy Burton. There is a basic introduction training on September 15th. That's primarily aimed toward administrators and central office folks who need to know more about restorative practices and what it could look like for use in a building. It's sort of an overview and how it should be used per the law, not so much the actual implementation of it. And then on October 24th and 31st, there is a 2-day training that includes certification that is much more geared toward the folks that are actually going to have to implement and manage the restorative practices programs in your buildings. So maybe more for your counselors, your deans, your building admins who will be leading the restorative practices sessions and efforts in your building. So that's out there as another resource for you guys if you need it. Last new law for this year, CPR training takes effect. What this law says is that at some point, what the law said was that the state of Michigan, the Department of Ed, is going to have to embed basic CPR psychomotor skills training and AED awareness into the health content standards for grades 7 through 12. What does that mean for you? It means that if you are going to be offering a health class that aligns with the state standards for health, you need to offer basic CPR psychomotor skills. By psychomotor skills, I mean the compressions, chest compressions, and AED awareness. This is an AED. This is what it does. This is, what it looks like. At some point in grades 7 through 12, there is no requirement that every student take the training. So for example, if you offer it in 9th grade in your health class and a student is absent on the day that you do CPR and AED awareness training, the student doesn't necessarily have to make it up. It's not a 100% thing. It's not an everybody has to do this thing. It's a you have to offer it thing. Let's say you decide to bake it into your 7th grade curriculum, and you have a student who transfers in 9th grade, and at their previous school, they didn't, their previous school had it as part of their high school health class. You don't have to worry about going back and getting that student the CPR and AED training. The issue here is offering it and providing it and baking it in sometime in grades 7 to 12. It's not a thing, 100% check the box kind of thing. So just be aware of that. The psychomotor skills that the law requires in the AED awareness could easily be fit into a single class period session. There are plenty of resources out there freely available from the Heart Association and from the Red Cross that your health teachers can adapt into a nice brief lesson on the state required CPR training. So be aware of that going into next year. So what's still pending? We've gone through at this point everything, all the big stuff that you guys need to know going into the new year. The stuff in this next section is things that have not happened yet, but the things that could be making headlines moving forward going into the fall. Though I would tell you that I wouldn't expect that any of them will actually take effect during the next school year. At least that would be our big push is, you know, if you're going to make these changes, make them going forward. But you do want to be aware of these things. They're the things that you're going to be hearing about and potentially worrying about or freaking out about mid-year or going into next school year. ESSA is probably the biggest on this list. MDE is currently working with the U.S. Department of Education to finalize our state's ESSA plan. ESSA is the replacement for No Child Left Behind. The biggest changes that you're going to see immediately is starting this coming school year, the 17-18 school year, we're going to get a new school dashboard. The color-coded report card is gone. Instead, we're going to be having a dashboard of indicators, but no letter grades, no summative grade attached to any of it. Just an indicator and how that indicator for your building compares to the state. So that's a big change for this upcoming year. The other big change you're going to want to know about doesn't happen this year, it'll happen next year, which is the change in assessments. We'll be moving toward a hybrid benchmark summative system in grades 3-7 and transitioning to the PSAT in grade 8, which will mean that we'll have a hybrid benchmark summative system in grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then beginning in 8th grade, it'll be PSAT in 8th grade, PSAT 9, PSAT 10, and then SAT in 11. With the work keys and M-STEP wraparounds as necessary. Now, that's what we know as of right now, and I'll tell you that the dashboard is going to go into effect for this next school year because it'll be too late. It's already too late to make any changes to that. But this whole plan of the department still needs approval from the U.S. Department of Education. So all of this is still subject to change. However, I don't expect that much change to these two pieces that are going to most affect building level administrators. The department is proposing, and I think we'll get changes to administrator certification. They're working to finalize new admin cert rules. They're going to be going before the legislature for a final review soon. The biggest change for those of you who have a grandfathered certification or who are grandfathered in, essentially not requiring a certification because you were employed as an administrator before January 4th of 2010, is that the department is going to be creating a new certificate. It's going to be a grandfathered certification. But right now, the way the law works is that if you were an administrator before January 4th of 2010, you don't need a certificate. You just say, I was an administrator before this thing, so I'm grandfathered. The department is now going to be creating a certificate. To get it, all you have to do is show that you were employed as an administrator before January 4th of 2010 and demonstrate that you're up to date with your continuing education requirements, your 150 sketches every 5 years. The bigger thing, though, is that you're going to have to demonstrate that. So you're going to need some evidence that you were employed as an administrator before that date and that you are up to date with your continuing ed. So it's a good idea if you are currently grandfathered and do not have an administrator cert that you consider collecting all the information on your sketches and all your other continuing ed and getting that together so you can demonstrate that you're up to date with that. Because once these rules go into effect, every administrator in the state is going to need to have some form of certificate, whether it's a full cert or a grandfathered cert. I would also suspect that once this happens and schools become aware of it, note that your local district can always require that you have a cert even if the state law doesn't require it. I suspect that that's going to be that's going to be the case in several districts where the board or the central office is now going to want to make sure that every administrator in the district has a certification. So be aware of this coming up. If you do not have a cert, you're worried about it, you're trying to find a way to get a full administrator cert, you can always consider Path to Leadership, which is an MASSP alt cert program that's available to folks who maybe already have a master's, but didn't necessarily get a master's in administration and are looking for a way to get that certification. Chelsea, I think, is going to be chatting out a link to the Path to Leadership page here before too long, so that'll be there as a resource for you guys. As always, it seems there is yet another discussion around the Michigan Merit Curriculum. The House has already passed a quartet of bills. Two of them we are a repeat from last year. They're calling them the 21st Century Skills Package. What it would do is replace the World Language and Visual Performing and Applied Arts credits, 2 credits World Language, 1 credit BPAA, with a new 3-credit block that students could fulfill with a combo of those courses listed there. VPAA, World Language, Computer Science or Coding, or a formal CTE program. They also passed a bill allowing statistics to substitute for Algebra 2, and finally one that would allow 30 hours of OSHA workplace safety training to substitute for the half credit of health. Note that all of those bills have passed the House, but are over in the Senate. And the Senate, for their part, hasn't even given these bills a hearing. The Senate instead, at the same time the House was working on its bills, named a subcommittee. Essentially said, it's been 10 years since the MMC became law. We're going to create a special subcommittee to do a complete review of the law from top to bottom. They held several hearings this past spring. MASSP was well represented at those hearings. Several principals from around the state came and testified. And the Senate MMC agenda, we believe, is going to be driven not by the bills the House passed, but by the recommendations of the subcommittee. Subcommittee is currently working on its recommendations. Their last testimony was this spring. We thought we might see something this summer, but we did not. I would not be surprised to see something in the early fall in terms of recommendations. But I don't know that the Senate is going to go quite as far as the House in terms of those bills. So know that the MMC debate continues, it seems, as always, but that right now, while the House has taken action, the Senate hasn't done anything, and I wouldn't hold my breath for major changes coming soon. Subteacher shortage, I highlighted this earlier as a priority for MASSP. Note that there are 3 bills out there, 2 of which have already passed the House, 1 of which is already out of committee, seeking to address this issue by expanding the pool of people who are eligible to be subs. One would reduce the credit hour requirements for daily subs. That's, the person you call in when somebody calls in sick, from 90 credit hours right now down to 60 credit hours. That bill has passed committee, but not the full House. The other 2 bills have passed the full House. One would waive the requirement to have any credit hours for substitute teachers who have an industry recognized credential. An example here might be you have a local dance instructor or a certified cosmetologist whom you want to bring in to substitute teach in a district dance course or a district cosmetology course. It's primarily geared towards CTE, though there may be some circumstance where you could use it for a non-CTE course. But it would waive the credit hour requirement so the person would not have to have those 90 credit hours. The other big one, and this is probably the biggest of the 3, would eliminate the requirement for districts to pay the unfunded accrued liability on retirees who substitute teach. What happens right now is that any recent retiree, if a school wants to hire that person as a substitute teacher, they have to pay what amounts to an additional 21% of that substitute teacher's pay to the state as a MIPSers contribution. The practical impact of that is that nobody's hiring recent retirees to substitute teach, which is creating a huge shortage, not so much for the daily subs, but a lot more for the long-term subs where you need a qualified person in that job, and a recent retiree would be a great candidate. This bill would eliminate the requirement to pay that contribution to MIPSers, thus putting recent retirees back in the sub pool and hopefully helping with long-term sub needs. We recognize, however, that these 3 sub bills and the sub teacher shortage is not an isolated thing, but rather one symptom of a much larger issue around teacher shortage, and that the fixes to sub-shortage being proposed are a short-term Band-Aid type solution, and that we need to address the underlying issues. MASSP is working with the Education Alliance on addressing those underlying teacher shortage issues. I was just at a meeting this past Monday discussing this problem and walking through with a bunch of representatives from education associations, statewide education associations, about all the different things that are out there on this topic. Understand that the Ed Alliance includes representatives not just from MASSP, but also MASB, the school boards, the school superintendents, the elementary principals. It includes the teachers unions, non-public schools, the charters, higher education, MDE. The whole gamut of statewide education associations is represented in this group, and they are focused on and working toward addressing these underlying teacher shortage issues, hopefully starting in this upcoming year. So we recognize the underlying problem, and we are working collectively, hopefully toward at least some relief on that. I'd say a solution, but it's a big issue, and I don't know that there is a single solution that's going to work on this. So understand that we recognize it and are moving toward trying to address it. Last big issue I want to hit as a potential upcoming thing just to be aware of is that there are some bills. These bills have already passed the Senate. They're over in the House. I don't expect anything to happen with them anytime soon, but that these bills would deal with truancy. They would mandate the use of some common definitions around truancy and excused and unexcused absences. Some of these could be potentially problematic for districts, and we are working to address them. In particular, the definition of in attendance, meaning that you would have to have a student present for 90% of the day in order to count them in attendance, is a real problem, especially when you're talking about having to leave midday to go, get your braces adjusted or go to a doctor's appointment. I don't see any way that a student could leave for that length of time and still be present for 90% of the day. We are working with the bill sponsors to try and address that. Other things in these bills would be a limit on the number of excused absences a student could get for any reason. It would limit it to a certain set of reasons. And potentially the biggest thing is it would require written documentation for excused absences, which would mean that your voicemail systems for parents to leave excuses for students would no longer work. That is a big one that we are working with the sponsors to address. We believe we have a very good shot at getting all of these issues addressed and fixed before these bills make it into statute, and we're not even sure that they'll make it there. Understand the politics behind this. One of the bill sponsors is a candidate for Attorney General for the Republican Party. The other candidate for Attorney General for the Republican Party is the Speaker of the House. I'm not saying that the Speaker of the House would not allow these bills to move in order to create problems for his potential rival for the Attorney General's office. I'm just saying that I'm not sure that these bills are going to see the light of the day in the House anytime soon. I have my other bills to note out there. There's a lot of legislation we keep track of that we keep our fingers on the pulses of. I hit these in a single slide. The summary of this slide would be to say that if it's a big deal and it's on this slide, it's probably not going to happen. If it is going to happen and it's on this slide, it means that it's pretty much been neutralized or is meaningless for you at the building level. There are a lot of bills out there that we dig into and try and mitigate any harm on before they get to your level, try and address those issues before you have to deal with them. Some of these are those, others like that pre-Labor Day start bill, Senate Bill 271. Unfortunately, while we'd love to see SB 271 get some legs, I don't know that it's ever going to happen. And even if it were to get some legs in the Senate, I'm not sure it would ever see the light of day in the House. So bills on this, you may hear about them. I wanted you to be aware of them. But if these bills happen, they likely won't mean a whole lot to you, and most of them won't happen. So I talked earlier about the Title II petition we have going on. I do always like to highlight our Engage website. It's a pretty straightforward, simple way for you guys to engage in legislative goings-on, a way to have your voice heard. Sometimes it's sending a letter to your local legislators. In this case, it's a petition that we're going to be sharing with our Michigan delegation to try and have an influence on Title II. Easy to get to, mymassp.com/engage, or from our website. There's a nice little link that we have built in right over there on the right-hand side under Network and Outreach. You'll see it there. It's the Engage Advocacy link. So be aware that that's there, that's out there. There's a lot of good information on that page beyond just the alerts and the petitions that we put together. We've been asked a few times now to provide information on bills that are moving, what MASSP's position is on it, some more information. So we created our bill tracker. It's every bill that we're watching with our positions where we have some, a quick summary of the bill. If we have a position on it, we've summarized why we took that position and what our concerns are, so that if you guys need more information on any bill, we've probably got it. It's searchable using the Find feature on your browser, and it's pretty plug and play. So want to make sure that you guys knew about that. So just as Chelsea just chatted, any questions? Let me know.
We had one come in earlier from Amy. Has there been any discussion, proposal, guidance in addressing student free speech issues, specifically displays of Confederate flags, etc.? Already seeing this due to an issue due to current events and social media and things happening out in the world.
Short answer, no. You know, I understand that this is, you know, what's going on right now. Honestly, I'll tell you that there hasn't been anything yet, but understand that the legislature is gone for the summer. They will not be back until after Labor Day. So I don't suspect that you'll see anything legislatively until this fall at the very soonest. It would not surprise me if the big school law firms out there, the Truons of the world, the Los Galbertsons of the world, put out some guidance to their retainer clients. You know, we do our monthly legalese feature. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if an upcoming legalese feature includes something on this. But no, I don't suspect you'll see any changes coming out about that, even in response to current events. So all your current free speech laws and everything you currently know about student free speech applies. There were some bills out there last term that haven't yet gotten traction this term, but I don't see those moving anytime soon. And even if they did, they wouldn't take effect in the fall of this upcoming school year. So I understand the concern. I'm sensitive to it. They're just, the legislature is not always fast to react. And even if they were, I'm not sure we'd want them to, do a whole heck of a lot in this case. We've got some pretty clear free speech laws right now. I'd rather the legislature didn't muck with those at the moment. Any other questions you guys have? Happy to answer whatever you have. If not, or if you think of something later, or if you are one of the folks who is watching this as a recording after the fact, please feel free to shoot me an email, hit me up on Twitter, call me here in the office. You can get a hold of me in any of those ways, and I'm always happy to answer questions. Kelly, I see your question here. Any information on the governor's recommendation on EDPS in school improvement plans? I'm sorry, Kelly, I'm not familiar with the acronym. EDPS, help me out.
EDPs.
Oh, EDPs, got it, education development plans. In school improvement plans. No new information there yet. It was a governor's recommendation. I know the governor also came out and said that there should be more flexibility for CTE in merit curriculum and some other things. The governor came out after the legislature had already left for the summer. There's not a ton that can, not a ton that the executive can do on this that they haven't already done over the summer. So no new information on that governor's recommendation. There may be more as we get into the fall. Like I said, with the MMC slides that I went over, there's always some discussion. There's always some debate. But certainly nothing you guys need to react to for the upcoming year. And with MMC, as with so many issues, when we talk to folks on this, we really try to get them to understand that changes to the merit curriculum take time for districts to adjust to, and that they should really consider making them take effect moving forward for students coming into the system, especially new requirements rather than new flexibilities, so that you guys have time to adjust. Last questions, anything else? More information on the CPR AED requirements. I know we have an article somewhere on our website, but really all the law required in the end was that MDE embed standards in the health content standards for grades 7 to 12. I know they did that. I know there was a memo on it that I'll have to dig up. Look to your web lines. What I'll do is I'll pull together a summary piece of here's all the stuff that you got to worry about for the upcoming school year and put it in a web lines article before too long here. It's probably just going to be the 3 issues that I went over today: seclusion, restraint, zero tolerance, and CPR AED. I'll make sure to get that memo in there and get information out to the field about what's going on with that. And there's the article. Chelsea just sent a link to the article. And there are, I believe, some links in that article to additional resources you can look for. Other things? Anybody else? All right, well, not seeing anything. We've made it in under an hour, so I'm feeling pretty good about that. So I will see you guys later. Have a good school year. Hope this was helpful. And for those of you who want to share this with colleagues, we'll have a recording of today's webinar up on the website yet today. Thank you all.